Can you hear me now? Yeah, here we go. We're getting ready to start, and last call for anybody that wants to speak to either one of these bills. The first one's on electronic devices and holding them in your hand in the car and fines. The second one's about civil air patrol and for state employees to be able to, in times of national emergency, to be able to be released to work for the civil air patrol, those who are members. So if you want to speak, the list is on the podium. Please sign up. Anybody coming in late, there's a sign-up sheet if you want to speak. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start now, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this first meeting this year of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee. Typically, we start off with a prayer at the beginning of our session, so if Representative Rick Williams would give us a prayer, it'd be very much appreciated.
Thank you. Let's bow our heads. Thank you, dear Jesus, for the opportunity to be here again. Thank you for this beautiful day. Please bless our men and women who are in the armed forces serving all over this world. Please watch over our law enforcement personnel and guide them and be they're safe. Please bless us and give us the ability and the knowledge and the courage to do the things that we need to do for the state of Georgia. Amen.
Okay, our first bill today is substitute House Bill 113, LC 392489S. Representative Carson is author of the bill, and you're on, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the an update to the hands-free law, and just as part of background, I want to thank each and every member here, literally from the bottom of my heart, for supporting the legislation back in 2018. I will tell you that there has been a massive effort and productive effort as well to make the Georgia public and many drivers in our border states aware of what we've done. AAA and Governor's Office of Highway Safety report about a 99% awareness of the law. I wouldn't say adherence to the law, but I would say awareness to the law. What we're trying to do in this legislation is update some parameters and clean up a few things to create more of a deterrent and to remove the first-time waiver, which some other speakers will speak about. What we've seen as a result of the hands-free law, and no, we cannot absolutely attribute it to House Bill 673 that was passed by this body in 2018. But what we've seen, with no other changes in state transportation and highway safety laws, we saw about a 2.25% decrease in fatalities in 2018, from 2017 to 2018. We saw another 4% or 4.2% decrease in fatalities from 2018 to 2019. Now, that's just on flat level number of fatalities. Obviously, we're a growing state. We have a growing population. We have a growing economy. And when you factor in those items, such as more people and more people driving further miles in a growing economy, our number of fatalities statistically per 100 million vehicle miles traveled has actually gone down about 7%. So year over year, 4% decrease. But when you factor in, you should have, unfortunately, more fatalities with a growing economy, more people on the road, so forth. We're actually down 7%. I think we're doing fantastic. Having said that, I think we could do more. You'll see in the endorsement letters that are coming out a number of different groups, but I wanted to point out to one that was sent out by the Georgia State Patrol. And what they have basically said is that we have simply got to have more deterrent. I think if I were to take a poll of anybody or of this committee, Mr. Chairman, I think most people would say there's still a lot of, should I say, what am I trying to say? People are not adhering to the law.
Non-compliance.
There you go, non-compliance. And it's pretty negligent. What we're trying to do here is create more deterrent. Now, I've had the state patrol and the police chiefs and so forth say, we simply cannot, we don't have the staff, we don't have the resources, we don't have the patrol cars to deal with all these issues. We've got to have more deterrent against the driver, and that's what this does. So, if I may, I'm just going to walk through some of the changes. I'm on, to the chairman's point, I'm on LC 392489. What we're doing with the fines to create that deterrent that Georgia State Patrol talks about in their letter, the fines are 50, 100, 150 currently. As a maximum, we're looking for that fee to be the new minimum, and that the new maximum will be 100, 200, 300. So your current fines of 50, 100, 150 would go to 50 to 100, 100 to 200, 150 to 300. In addition, we are asking the legislature's intent that these fines, as per lines, you see it on lines 100 to 105. I've already talked about this with Chairman England. What we're stating here is that it is the intent of the General Assembly to, we can't dedicate by statute, but intend that these fines go to the Georgia Trauma Trust Fund. Significant need there, particularly in the rural areas of our state in regard to access to level 3 and level 2 trauma centers. So one, go up on the fines just to create the deterrent. Two, to declare those fines go to the Georgia Trauma Trust Fund. Three, we are allowing court fees, which is something that's allowed for just about every other traffic misdemeanor, but just not the hands-free law. And then fourth, we are attempting to do away with the first-time waiver. You'll hear from some district attorneys in regard to how this is just simply not enforceable. And that language is on 91 through 95, lines 91 through 95. It basically says, if I have a first offense and I go into court and I sign an affidavit, this is my first time being charged with such and such offense of the hands-free law, I can sign an affidavit and I get off, there shall be no penalty whatsoever. And from a legal standpoint, there's not even a charge and you're found not guilty. There has never been a charge, period. And it creates a legal issue because if I were to have a hands-free law violation in Cobb County and it be administered by a Cobb County court, and then I go see my friend Representative Gravely and then Paulding County, and I have another hands-free violation in Paulding County, those two courts don't talk to each other, and neither do the municipal courts to the state courts or to the county courts. So it creates a legal issue. So with that, Mr. Chairman, going up on the fines to create a deterrent. Two, asking the General Assembly's intent that these additional revenues go to the Georgia Trauma Trust Fund. Very much needed there. Number three, doing away with the first-time waiver. Oh, and lastly, one more item. We are increasing the penalties in the school and work zones. And you'll see that on lines 96 through 99. And with that, Mr. Chairman, as you can see, I can inundate your committee with a number of endorsement letters. I have already. I have more here if you want them. But happy to take a question or two.
Okay, we certainly have a couple. Number 19.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to my good friend, Representative Carson, thank you so much. And congratulations, by the way, on the hands-free law. I think that, in my mind, it was a great thing to do, and it's given us great results, so I appreciate that. My concern is, on line 100, we talk about it is the intent. And I understand the earmarking issue, that we can't earmark funds for a particular project or whatever in the general fund. But the word intent concerns me because intent changes with administrations. Mm-hmm. Intent changes with availability of budgets, and that's the other part of this that I have some concerns about. It says subject to appropriations. Now, you explained intent. Could you explain to me and this committee subject to appropriations? Does that mean that in a bad budget year, this is not going to go to the trauma center? It's going to go to wherever we want it to go? Is it discretionary at that point? What do we do?
It, just as it said, to your point, sir, yeah, I don't like the words intention either. I would love to be fully dedicated. But in order to be fully dedicated, that we have to pass a constitutional amendment that, as I understand it, is being negotiated between the House and Senate right now. That was authored by our friend, the late Representative Jay Powell, in order to dedicate fees, such as the tire fund fee. That is still being worked out legislatively between our body and the Senate. And I would love to be able to dedicate in this bill, but two things would need to happen for you and I to not have the concern about the words intention. Number one, that referendum would need to obviously pass both houses and pass the voters with a 50% plus one margin, and pass each of our chambers by a 2/3 margin for a constitutional amendment, and then pass the voters in November. The second thing would need to happen is that we would have to slightly reword this and pass this individual bill with a 2/3 vote in each chamber. So I understand what you're saying, and having said that, I do get the pushback from those on appropriations as well, that they don't want to dedicate per se, or people, who are analysts supporting the committee, what have you. They don't want to have their hands tied either. But this is the most strong wording and language that we can have at this time until that referendum passes and is approved by the voters, such that it's an intention of the legislature to allocate this to trauma care.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. Follow up, please. Okay. So I understand, but to me, intent means that I don't have to. And I think we all understand that. The subject to appropriations is probably more concerning because the appropriations that we're talking about are monies that have been paying fines that have come into the General Assembly that is designated for the trauma center. Why is it then subject to appropriations? I think I'm still trying to, I understand folks don't want to be painted into a box, but I'm still concerned if we get $10 as a result of the fines, mm-hmm. then $10 ought to go to the trauma center. And it shouldn't be subject to discretion of whether we're budgetarily strong and sound or not. And so intent I understand, but subject to appropriations I certainly have some concerns, as I'm sure you do as well.
This is how, under current law, under our Constitution, again, the strongest wording that we can craft to make sure that these funds go to the intended purpose, which is trauma care. As of right now, this is the most strong wording that we can provide.
Again, thank you for your efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, Representative Powell. Representative Collins, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Representative Carson, for bringing this bill to us. And again, to echo my colleague there, I think Georgia is a much safer place because of your efforts a couple of sessions
Thank you.
ago in passing this. One of the things that I'm concerned about when raising the fees is, you get back home and folks say, well, if this is about safety and not about revenue, then why are you going up on this? And I understand the deterrent. Did you give any thought to adding community service to some of these higher tier fines at all as a deterrent?
We have not, because the biggest deterrent is a monetary damage. And I don't even want it. And that's exactly to my friend Representative Lanton's point in regard to the intention of the General Assembly. That's not my favorite language, but at the same time, the biggest deterrent, and that's what we need right now, the biggest deterrent is a fine, and preferably that would be to go to me for the trauma trust fund, where so much expense for the state is incurred.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Evans?
Now, that's me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Williams.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Carson, thank you very much for this. I, too, echo the sentiments of Representative Collins. But there is the Brain and Spinal Injury Trust Fund that has been passed by a constitutional amendment, Code Section 15-21-149, that can accept fines and can go straight to that, from the fines. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That has passed, thanks to my predecessor, Representative Rusty Kidd. That's Brain, Spinal Injury, and Trust Fund of Georgia could accept the fine straight to it, if you would consider that.
I'm yield to the wisdom of the committee. I want to get people off their phones and save lives.
I do too. And I applaud your efforts, and I still see people on them. And every time I pull up beside someone, they're on their phone, I'll start blowing my horn at them, getting their attention. Do something to break their attention. But I do applaud your efforts, and we've got to. I've had relatives killed by someone on a phone. So I applaud your effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is correct about the Brain and Spinal Trust Fund Commission. I served on it for a while, and from my assessment, the majority of the people that are there were riding motorcycles, or they weren't wearing seat belts and they were ejected, and they've had some pretty significant head injuries, head trauma, and spinal cord issues. But certainly this falls into the same category with people coming across the road and hit head on. They're very very dramatic collisions, and that is an alternative.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, unless there's another question, I wanted to provide some point of reference in regard to the fees. Again, I leave it to this committee's good judgment. I would like to point out that distracted driving was not near an issue until the proliferation of smartphones. And these smartphones, yes, you get them on a 2-year contract at Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, what have you, and you essentially finance them as long as you agree to the service for 2 years, right? With these items right here, without a contract, you're probably talking $700-800 retail for one of these. But you're just financing that over 2 years. Virginia, and we have some other speakers for what other states are doing. Virginia just passed a bill where their first offense for distracted driving passed the House. I believe it was $300 first fine. According to our friends in the insurance industry, the average cost of a car crash, average, as far as the property damage, that's the damage that I would do if I'm driving my car and I hit someone else's car, that's about $4,000 to $5,000. Collision is another $4,000 or $5,000. That pays for fixing my car. Bodily injury, as per the insurance industry, is from data from APCIA. Bodily injury is another $19,000. And if you talk to the Georgia Hospital Association or analysts for the medical community, you're probably looking somewhere around that from what they calculate as far as bodily injury from an auto crash of some sort, around $20,000 to $22,000. So when I know people don't want to go back home in an election year and talk about they voted for a $100 fine. But I want you to understand the gravity of this issue and how little and minuscule a $100 fine is compared to losing a life, property damage, or bodily injury.
Representative Holcomb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm with you on changing lines 91 through 95. I think that makes sense, especially since this law has been on the books for a little bit, and it's no longer something that we need to raise awareness about. And my guess is that was probably what drove including that section into the code. I have some questions, though, in terms of the raising of the fees. It seems to me that there are already a number of deterrences that exist. Just the knowledge that you can kill somebody, kill yourself, hurt somebody, hurt yourself, damage somebody else's car, damage your own car, get a ticket, get a fine, get points on your license. So what metrics, if any, what research, if any, do you have to support the proposition that raising fines by what really are pretty nominal amounts is going to make major change in behavior?
I think 2 items together, well, 3. I can provide some data in regard to where the average initial fine is and second and third fine is nationwide for the Representative Holcomb for the states that have a hands-free law, and it's a little bit higher than Georgia's, number 1. Number 2, people know that this is dangerous behavior. They know it. But nevertheless, they are addicted to their cell phones. And I tell you, when we were passing this bill in 2018, what I heard from so many, not obviously the victim, but the person driving the car, was, I was being so selfish. I was being so selfish. I was being so selfish. That text, that calendar invite, this something on Twitter and so forth. I was being so selfish. So I understand what you're saying. You're absolutely correct, Representative Holcomb. People know that this is a dangerous behavior, that they can risk damage to themselves, harm to themselves, harm to others, and so forth. But nevertheless, they engage in this behavior. And that's why I believe we need to make the deterrent. I don't think this issue is really real. I mean, they see the hands-free units in the stores. People that sell those thank me for it, for creating this law. People see the units in the stores. They see the signs on the interstate. They see the billboards. They see it at the sign at when you get into Georgia and from Hartsfield Airport. But it doesn't really become real until they have a crash or they have a loved one that's in a crash. So.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you on that, which is why I'm skeptical that just raising the fine, which, let's face it, most Georgians don't even know what the fine is today. If we approve this, they're not going to know what the fine is either. So I understand what your goal is. Mm-hmm. I'm questioning whether or not just raising the dollar figure of the fine is going to achieve that. Or are there other ways of just continued education, various messaging that can get to the place where you're driving at?
I don't think education is going to do it because people are well aware of the law in place. I think to accomplish what you're asking for, I think it would take 2 things. I think it would take the raising the fine to create the deterrent, and as per the law enforcement endorsement letter, and second, to your point, eliminating lines 91 through 95 in regard to the first offense.
Okay. The last thing that I'll say is I'm a lawyer, but I don't do this stuff. But I had a buddy who had just went through a stop sign, and like the end result was like $1,500 worth of fines. It was insane. And I think a number of local communities like use these types of things to generate every dollar of revenue that they can. So my very strong suspicion is going to be that if we have a variation in terms of what can be charged, 99.9% of the time, the court's going to assess the highest dollar amount because they want to get the most money from the driver. So effectively, we're really not approving a range, we're approving a raise.
That would be up to the judges, and I sympathize with what you're saying.
That's it.
But we are putting maximums here.
And I don't mean to interject into this, but you know, I worked on the state patrol for 43 years, and I tell you, fines and bonds are controversial across the state. And I've always thought that we ought to have some form of unified bond system where the same fine occurred no matter where you got it. I've seen it, I'm from Savannah, I've seen it in Chatham County where you run 50 miles an hour the speed limit, it costs you $35. You'd be 3 counties away, and I won't name the county, but they started off at 300 for the same offense. And I've just always thought that was wrong, and that if you're very wealthy, that's nothing to you. If you're down and out, that's exorbitant. It may take food off your table, gasoline out the car, or mortgage payment, or whatever. So, but that's neither here nor there, I guess, today. But that's always been my philosophy, and I don't know about, my guess is that when they set bonds here, or if you agree to pay a fine, that they would be within the confines of these established numbers here. Would that be correct, John, as far as you know?
That is correct. And by the way, I just had a correction. Indiana's House approved a distracted driving bill. It needs to go to the Senate. Their first fee is $500.
And if I remember correctly, when we were on the study committee, I believe in Oregon, it was like $100 the first time, $500 the second time, and $10,000 the third time.
Yes.
So you know,
Yeah,
they obviously want to curtail repetitive offenses.
Correct.
But, okay, Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not often that me and Mr. Holcomb agree on something, but we do agree. I remember when you brought the first bill up, and I was opposed to it at that time.
Yes, sir.
And I was opposed for probably a multitude of different reasons. You came in with all these high fees then. And I said, this is nuts. That something that's been marketed to the American public that we've gotten used to, But then we finally, I think, what passed. Now, as I read your bill, you know, there's been enough time has passed to do away with that pledge that you didn't know or you going to do this and that. So it's time to do away with that.
Mine's 91 through 95.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So I can understand doing away with that. But what you've continued to do is the same pattern that you did a few years ago, and that's to raise these fines to an exorbitant level. One is that you've also added, if I understood what you said, you're adding the surcharges back into it. So that a $300 fine then becomes almost $500. Let me tell you something. I can tell you the history on a lot of things that this committee has done and motor vehicles has done over the years. When we kept raising the fines on DUIs, then all of a sudden the judges started changing the charge to aggravated or whatever, something lower than a DUI. You know, these are some things, there's only a certain thing that, on a certain point that the public can absorb or understand. And to say that you're going to jack somebody up for $500 for a cell phone, even though, quite frankly, I look at that the same way I do a DUI. If anybody's got the second or third DUI, they're too stupid to have a driver's license. But on the first one, I think for the sake of uniformity, is do away with the Section 91 for the freebie. Set a uniform fine, and without the surcharges. Charge them $100. charge them $100 every time, and pretty soon you're going to get their attention. Mr. Alcom spoke about the courts. I see the judge nodding his head. Hell yes. They like fines. They do like fines. And they like surcharges, because the surcharges goes to their retirement funds. It goes to all these wonderful things.
Joshua's Law.
But at some point, we have to understand, when does a fine become a tax? And that's what this is doing.
I don't know where the question, I sympathize with what the chairman is saying, but a tax is compulsory. This is meant to punish a misdemeanor. And I understand we have difference of opinion on where the starting point is or where the negotiating point is, but everyone has to pay a tax. Not everyone, there's no choice as to whether or not to pay a tax. You have a choice in your behavior in regard to whether or not to violate this law.
When people make a mistake, then they're expected to pay the penalty for that mistake.
I
But
agree.
in this day and time, and with the law enforcement activities that we have, you can be a shoplifter in certain sections of Atlanta. They won't even send a police officer up. That's not justice, ladies and gentlemen. Nor is justice to put a $500 fine on an offense, even though I'm not as concerned about that third or second or subsequent offenses. But I say move it to the first, to a standard fee.
Does that conclude your remarks, Chairman?
It does.
Chairman Clark. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't, and forgive me if I overlooked in the bill. I remember 2 years ago, there were points that were assigned. Do you remember what those points were
Yes.
for the first offense, second offense, third? Can
Yeah.
you go tell me what those
First
are?
offense, very simple. First offense, 1 point. Second offense, 2 points. Third and subsequent offenses, 3 points.
Okay. And how much in your premium, do you know like a standard average of what a point on a license costs when they get reevaluated?
I do not know.
Because I think that's the long-term punishment for somebody committing, in my opinion, raising the points even, like by making it 2, 3, 4, because they have to pay that they're reminded every month when they get that premium payment or quarter or however often they pay the mode that they pay. They're reminded that, dang, my bill went up $25 this month, because of my action. Instead of just the fee, they would have the ongoing memory of their action. Because I do have the same concerns that have been expressed. I don't know if raising, you could go $400 on the first offense, and people, I just think they're gonna. Very rarely do I see that kind of thing being a deterrent. People are gonna do that. I don't think it's gonna deter it. I do agree with getting rid of the first offense. I don't think that's enforced, because if it gets taken off.
The waiver.
Yes, the lines 91 through 95. I agree with that, because I think if they get the first offense and then in another county they do it again, they're constantly getting the first offense and never actually getting charged anything. I just want to express the sentiments that have been shared, and maybe looking at the points on the license part, maybe raising those a point or two, maybe getting second offense, it goes up, instead of it being 2 points, it goes up to 3 points, and then 4 or 5 points on the third offense, because that would be an ongoing reminder.
I'm happy for the input, but I would say that a number of insurance companies allow people to remove the consideration for points that are assessed by DDS by doing a defensive driving course or what have you. So that can easily be, let's say I go out and commit an offense on the hands-free law, and I am assessed 2 points, for example. Well, I could mitigate that by taking a defensive driving course. I have State Farm insurance. or what have you. So,
And I understand that too. I do think that the way this is it's a heavier burden on lower income people. Like, you know, so somebody who is of more means, you know, $100 fine or even $150 or $300 fine to them is not going to be as big of a deterrent as it would be maybe to somebody of lower income. But they only allow you to do those defensive driving courses once every so often, and after that you can't get that anymore. So maybe the first time they go out and they're like, I don't want to pay this, so I'll go. And there again, costing somebody their time, that might stick in their memory a little bit more to go take this defensive drive. Maybe mandate that on the first offense too. You get the fee and you're required to take a defensive driving course. Because then it starts to cost people their time. The community service was a good idea because people value their time. So those are just some ideas.
sure.
Representative Petrie?
Thank you, Chairman. And my question was asked by Representative Holcomb down there, but I do want to make a couple of comments. So I was interested as well, as Representative Holcomb had mentioned, in any empirical data that you could point to suggest that, yes, raising, you know, we can commonsensically assume that the higher the fine, the more of an impact we have on reducing the behavior. I also believe, so I wanted to echo that same comment. I was, interested if you had any data to really prove it. We know that the law reduces fatalities. That's a great thing, and I was very supportive of this bill. I do believe texting and driving is more dangerous than drinking and driving. I absolutely believe that to be true. And so certainly supportive of where we're trying to go, but I also have some concerns as others have interested. But I want to mention a couple of things since my question was already asked, and say this. First of all, the best thing about this proposal is where you double fines in work zones and in school zones. Because quite frankly, yes, people continue to make mistakes. Human beings are human beings. We know you're not supposed to text and drive. But by God, if you're doing it in a work zone or a school zone, there's no excuse. Because you know the likelihood is somebody standing on the side of the road. And so I think that and the waiver of the first penalty makes immense sense. So that's my opinion at this point. I'm still considering what you've done here with fines. I don't know the degree to which raising the fine matters, because I do agree that most people have no idea what it is in the first place. They should. They should just know they don't need to do it and stop doing it. But I don't know what impact at the end of the day we would have simply by raising that fine. At any rate, thank you, Representative, for bringing the bill.
Thank you.
Representative Frazier, didn't you have yours on? Did you change your mind?
Thank you, Representative Carson. The question I have is this. When in your opening remarks, you stated that our local law enforcement officers do not have the manpower to actually stop and enforce the texting law that we already have.
Not for every driver that's in violation, no.
And so this is not going to help. This is not going to increase the law enforcement officers. They're still going to have the same problem. Because they don't have the manpower, is what you were saying.
For the amount of violations.
Yeah, so
this is meant to decrease the number of violations.
So my question to you is, as far as the accountability on how much we're going to raise from these tickets that we're going to give out, is there some type of financial trail or something that I can look in maybe at the end of the fiscal year and find out how much money will be going to the trauma center once we are done, like at the 6 months or a year from now?
Yes.
Is there going to be a line item in appropriations, or where would I look to find out how much revenue has been collected from?
It's my understanding that yes, ma'am, Representative Frazier, there would be a line item available from Department of Audits and Accounts in regard to the revenue impact of this. And obviously, to the question that was posed earlier, in regard to the intent of the legislature directing those to the trauma care fund.
Thank you.
Any other representatives have any questions with regard to this bill? You know, I don't think we're ever going to stop it, to be perfectly honest. And I'm old enough, I remember long before there were ever phones in cars of any type. But, you know, particularly amongst our young people, I feel like, and we all do, that phone goes off or the text goes off, and you know, we get a little dose of dopamine that makes us feel a little good when you pick it up and your friend's texting you, or you got a call from your friends. And most of the cars today, my wife's car got internal phone in it, and we drive back and forth. I can talk on the phone. The good news for me is my wife comes up here with me every time we come, and when I get a text, I get her to read it, and I say, "You write what I say." But that's one of the few times she does what I say. But you know, I don't think we can ever underestimate the tragedy that I've done it before. Everybody in here has done it before. You can look down for 3 or 4 seconds, and if you're on the interstate, you hear your tires hitting the side when it starts on the where it's ruffled and makes the noise, which was originally designed to wake you up at night. But for those who've been involved in law enforcement and seen the tragedy that motor vehicle accidents cause, you know, we used to always talk about people that rubberneck. You see an accident and everybody's trying to watch and see, and sometimes they see more than they want to see, and they wish they hadn't looked. But I've seen it. It's troublesome to me. I wish there was an easy solution, but as you can hear from the people here today, they're obviously isn't. But we have a sign-up sheet here. A lot of people are very interested in this and want to speak. First off is Judge Jackson, who's repeated. No, he's up here every year. He's very conscious about safety and likes to have his say, and is very very knowledgeable about all facets of traffic safety.
Well, I do see, we had a short day today, Mr. Chairman, 161 cases, 4 of which were distracted driving. I'm speaking today on my own behalf, not on behalf of my court or my counsel. And I first want to thank Representative Carson for passing this hands-free law. I've been a full-time judge. I'm now in my 20th year, about 15 years part-time before that. I cannot recall a single law that has affected human behavior on the roads more than this bill. The hands-free law has really, or at least attempted, and in many cases succeeded in changing human behavior, but there's a long way to go. When we had the informal meeting before the session, I handed out a fact sheet. 2018, the Atlanta Municipal Court had 7,988 distracted driving cases. You can look at this graph and you can see July 1 when the hands-free 678 bill went into effect. Last year in the Atlanta Municipal Court, we had 21,618 distracted driving cases. And that's just in our court. Now, we are the busiest court in the state. We've done as many as 250,000 cases a year. And it is off the charts as far as the number of cases we see. Like I said, today was a slow day. I only had 4. I've had as many as 20 in one session. I'm one of 6 traffic judges that hear these types of cases. I'm here today to talk about one part of this bill and one part only. Again, my personal request. Please do not add surcharges to these fines. They were referred to and have been referred to in the past as court costs. They are not court costs. These additions do not go to the court. They go to the state of Georgia and they're deposited in the general fund. And they are extremely high. Not only that, they are diverted away from the purpose for which they're collected. Let's talk about numbers. a $50 fine in the Atlanta Municipal Court will be right at short of $75. A $100 fine is just short of $145. A $200 fine for this offense would be $286. The formula in my court is 42.5% plus $3. That's what it is. Some other courts are different. They have different technology fees or local fees that have been passed either by their city or councils or county commissions or local bills in the legislature. But these surcharges, for example, they get diverted away from the purpose for which they're collected. And the criticism of this practice is almost uniform. I'm showing you newspaper articles that go back as far as 2012. They talk about $11 million being collected for Joshua's Law one year in 2012 to supposedly go to educate young drivers. $0 was appropriated that year for that purpose. The money was deposited in the general fund. For all I know, they used it to put gasoline in a park ranger's boat, which is certainly needed, but that's not why the money was collected. Now, I was a collection lawyer for 25 years. If I collected money for one client, gave it to another, I'd be sued, disbarred, and indicted in a heartbeat. I have seen these surcharges described as creative accounting, phantom earmarks, legalized embezzlement. Frankly, it's a tax. It is a tax on the motoring public that everybody has to pay. And again, it's voluntary. If you break the law, you're going to pay this. But these surcharges, in at least one instance, actually exceed the amount of the fine, not a traffic matter, but possession of marijuana. There's an extra surcharge, and for example, you get fined $75 for that, you pay $171. I heard one judge describe these surcharges as so many decorations on the Christmas tree that the tree's about to fall over. And these funds are not court costs. They don't go to my court or any court. They go to the General Assembly, and they are the bane of my existence. Every day I have to explain to people, well, you had an accident, you're okay, you had insurance, you had your seatbelt on, it's a $200 fine, go pay the clerk, the cashier, $286. And I tell them that $86 doesn't go to the city of Atlanta, it goes to the state. And that is the worst part of my job, having explained to people why their fines are so high, and I have no control over these surcharges. Now, if it's a traffic ticket like an accident or a speeding charge, yes, they can do community service. You cannot on what we call a fine-only offense. And there are several of them: seat belts, HOV lanes, open containers, and cell phone hands-free. They're fine-only. There is no community service or probation permitted. And how y'all decide what those rates are going to be, that's a political decision in which judges don't get involved. But let's not call it a court fee. Let's not call it a court charge. It is a state surcharge that goes to the state, and I really wish you would eliminate them all. For goodness sakes, please don't add another one, because it's just wrong to collect money for one purpose and not spend it for that purpose. And Representative is correct. Unless you have a constitutional amendment that dedicates those funds, as Mr. Kidd, and I had the great pleasure of working for his dad when I was over here in Legislative Council, unless you have an absolute dedication, which is certainly a great idea, you can't force the Appropriations Committee to spend the money. And again, this is the worst part of my job, is having to deal with these surcharges. And there's a lot of bookkeeping involved as well. It goes through the clerk's cooperative fund, and then it goes into the general fund. And when people pay some things, not this one on probation, we have to allocate it as it comes in. We do have computer programs for that. But to give you an example, of those 21,000 people that came into court last year in the Atlanta Municipal Court, if half of them paid a $100 fine, you're talking about $480,000 paid into the state in essentially what is a tax. That's the kind of money you're dealing with because of the quantity that we have. But again, I salute Representative Carson. This bill has absolutely changed the law, and some of the people actually giving away, I saw lawyers giving away hands-free device with their name and company on it. And I actually wore my cup holder out. I got to buy a new one. It broke. I've put the phone in so many times, it's time to get a new one. and it's a great idea. It saves lives. And frankly, I'm in the only profession where I don't want any repeat customers, but I'm getting them, and I'm getting them by the thousands. But you're going to tax the motorists in Atlanta about $500,000 a year if only half of them pay these types of fines, and that's a lot of money involved. Maybe that's what you do want to do, but they're not court fees. And I wish they were, because we could really do a lot in our court with it, but they're not. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. I think, Mr. Chairman, you may have seen this. If not, I'll give you one here. But you can just look at this and see the increase. And we just see them every day.
And I'm very, very cognizant of that. I tell you what, though, just a few years, it's been a year, 2 years now, Chairman Carson, that this been in effect. We've seen a
2 years.
reduction in fatalities already. With the lack of majority compliance, it still had a dramatic effect. And if some of those people who didn't lose their lives are friends or relatives of yours, it's pretty significant. We do have a couple of questions for you, Judge.
Yes, sir.
First is Chairman Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So 21,000 in your court was hands-free related, is that correct?
Distracted driving, I would say 95 or 99%. The only exception would be eating, reaching for the radio or something like that. But almost all of them are texting, and they come
Turning
into
around to
court and
correct
they
the
swear
kid in the
under
back
oath.
seat.
Yeah, they swear under oath that they've never had one, and we make them sign it. But as Representative Carson indicates, I don't know that they've been to Cobb County or Decatur and had the same thing, but I trust people to tell the truth, but
So,
some of them don't.
so out of that 21,000, 95% are hands-free related.
Probably more than that.
How many repeat offenses, do you have the numbers on like after they get the first one that they're now at step 2 getting the repeat offense? Do you have that
I would say,
information?
I don't know, but from my own experience, in the last, what are we talking about, 18 months or so that we've had this, or I would say I could count on 2 hands a number of times when people actually plead guilty or no contest, as opposed to taking the oath that I've never had one. I've asked them, is this your second one? And they'll say yes. It's less than 10 that I've seen. But that doesn't mean that they haven't had one somewhere else or they're not being truthful.
So,
but
I
very
mean-
few, but I really don't know. There's
So
just
they
no
get
way to tell
caught
because
once.
they're not
Right.
DDS related.
So they get caught once. It seems like even now, just on those numbers, that the fees that we have now might be a deterrent for them to be a repeat offender. I mean, if it goes down to 10 out of 21,000.
That's up to y'all to decide. I just don't, I'm only speaking because these surcharges are just, like I said before, the bane of my existence. They're
Okay.
if you ask me, what's the one thing you'd like to see in court reform? No more surcharges, but please don't add another one. Because
So
it creates a much, like we said earlier, it's $100 is $145, $200 is $286, $300 in my court will be about $427, and $500 will be slightly less than $711.
I might agree with you on getting rid of these things, but to Representative Carson, is there a way you could get the data for the amount of repeat offenses, like this offense 2 or 3 that have been in the last 18 months or so?
It's difficult to get that because you have not just one policing agency. You have state patrol. You have 159 sheriffs. You have 159 county police chiefs. You have 400 different municipal police departments. So it's really difficult because it's so decentralized. And this is, it would be very difficult to get that,
I understand
that data.
All right, thanks.
And we don't have the data either, unless I ran every single defendant who came into our court and had a hands-free, and then had my data department search my own court records. It'd take years to get that information. It's just not available because there is no, when this case is dismissed, we do not send that result to Department of Driver Services. So there is no central clearinghouse. There's no way to know.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next is Chairman Petrie.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, just to be clear, Judge, so you do or do not like court fees? All right. All jokes aside, I have a question for you. Explain to me the disparity between, so you've described very well what you have here in Fulton County. Tell me how these court fees vary across the state, if you can.
They're fairly the same, but for example, we have a technology fee. Columbus, Georgia does not. The governor's vetoed that a couple of times. There's a bill now, I think pending in some probate court to add it. They're very, very close, plus or minus $5 or $10 either way. Okay. Most of these are state surcharges, police officers' retirement. There are some local add-ons, but they're all at least 40%.
Okay, so that was my next question. So they tend to be around 40, 45%?
Somewhere in that range.
So we
yes.
could assume, this body could assume they're plus or minus across the state, 42 to
$100 fine will be
45%?
somewhere between 140 and 150 on an average.
Okay, so that you're pretty confident in that
Yes, sir.
figure. We all should, in our respective districts, we'd be in that range.
Somewhere in that range.
That's what
yes.
I'm interested in. Thank you, sir.
Chairman Powell. Judge, I can't tell you what a nice day it is. Mr. Hoffman and I agree on some things, and now the most distinguished jurist from Fulton County has backed me up
I don't know
about my
about that.
argument about these infernal fees that have been placed on them as surcharges. That
Well,
in
if you
most
change them-
cases,
if you change them to court costs, we'd love that. 'cause
we
it'd
don't
go to our
even know,
court,
quite
but it
frankly. I defy anybody to tell me if there's been an audit ever been run on some of these multitude of locusts that's been put onto a fine.
doesn't. Actually, there has been a study by the somebody connected with the University of Georgia, and it was done back in, I think, 2000. Well, I've got it here. Sandy Shannon of the University of Georgia did a study called Monetary Sanctions in the Criminal Justice System, looking at 9 different states. And that was done back in 2017. So that's been done. And
I'm not talking about a study. I'm talking about an audit on each one of these separate pots
I
pots
tell you, the
of money.
audit's zero.
But
they collect money and they don't,
Fur-
you'd have to
further
look at
question.
each budget, but there's no obligation. And they're collecting Joshua's Law, and the state, as far as I know, is not funding driver education in the high schools. Again, that would require a constitutional amendment, which I wish y'all passed.
Further question. When someone comes in front of your court, and whether they have lied or not lied about their first time getting caught, and then they come forth to you, and that fine, if they can't afford that fine, what's usually the procedure? Don't they wind up being remanded to private probation to pay those fines?
That is the only alternative, since cell phone like seatbelts, HOV, and open containers, what we call a fine-only offense. You cannot be sentenced to jail. However, one way around it is if they've had an accident. And by the way, my general policy, and this is just me, if you're on a cell phone and have an accident, you're going to driving school as part of your probation, and we can suspend the cell phone fine if you complete all the other things as an extra incentive. But I have no authority to do anything other than either issue a fine or suspend the fine. There is no probation or community service available for these various fine-only offense, like HOV lane is also a fine-only offense.
But in a fine-only offense, or in these fines, when they come in front of your court, and if the fines have reached a certain proportion, and if a lot of these folks can't afford to pay the fine, don't they go on private probation to pay
No,
those
sir.
fines?
They cannot go on probation. All I can do is reset the case, make them come back in the future and pay it. If they come back and pay it, fine. If they don't come back at all, then they fail to appear for a traffic matter and their license can be suspended. And I will tell you, if somebody comes back the third time and says, Judge, I just don't have the money, I do have the authority at that point to suspend the fine in the interest of justice, and I've done that more than once. But that's all I've got. There's no probation. You cannot go on probation to pay a fine-only offense because it's fine-only.
Private probation.
Private or public, doesn't matter.
The reason I ask that question, around the state in a lot of jurisdictions, when people can't pay their fines, then the judge, if they pled guilty or been found guilty, and if they can't pay that fine, then usually in a lot of jurisdictions, the judges place them on private probation
And we do that as well for
to
something
pay
that's
their,
not
to
final.
pay their
We do that
fines.
as well.
And then they're also incurring another penalty to pay the private probation service. So let me move to the next question.
May I add something consistent with what Justice Boggs did in the criminal justice reform? We make a specific inquiry on every case. Are you working? Do you have financial difficulty? No, Judge, I'm unemployed. Probation fees waived. We see somebody elderly or disabled, I don't even ask them. It's very obvious, and I don't want to embarrass them. And I just waive the probation fees. And in a city like Atlanta, that happens more often than you might think.
Well, you're pretty magnanimous, and that doesn't
No.
always transmit to other jurisdictions around
Well,
the state.
we're not in business to raise revenue, we're in business to save lives.
So let me ask the next question. The next question is, since all these figures are kind of sketchy on this, and this is a pretty drastic jump in what Representative Carson has put forth. If we did away with the clause on the first offense that they could sign the affidavit, if we did away with that, and then we just went to a straight fine, the same way running a red light, running a stop sign, any other of the moving traffic offenses, if we went to a straight up and down fine, $100 without surcharges, would that not reach out and get the attention as it should?
Well, I think that's a political question that y'all have to answer. That's something that's within your purview. I can tell you this, judges would still have the ability to suspend a fine if somebody comes to court and says, Judge, I was on that cell phone, didn't have an accident, I've got a perfect record, I sent myself to driving school. I would think most judges would exercise her discretion and suspend the fine, and they have that right even under how this bill is listed. It's not like a DUI where it says, and the fine shall not be suspended. So, but there would be a record made, which this bill would create, and you still have that discretion. You just can't put them on probation. They can't do community service. But the judge would still have the discretion, as this bill is written now, for good cause to suspend a fine, just like you can suspend any fine in any case, unless y'all put in the language like you see in a DUI, that the fine shall not be suspended. But of course, even in that case, you can convert to community service. Nobody in this country, it's unconstitutional to put somebody in jail if they can't pay a fine. There are alternatives.
Since you can talk around it quick as I can, let me ask this question then.
Yes, sir.
I understand what Representative Carson's doing. I disagree with the abnormal jump in the dollar amount, because I'm not always, it's never been my experience that you can just absolutely raise the fine so high that it has an alternative effect on the justice system.
Well, again, that's a political decision.
Now, I understand, I didn't ask that, but if we did away with the first offense phase right now of a sworn affidavit, and we just put a straight fine, say we left the language in here of no more than less than 100 or more than 100, 50 or 100. We took off the surcharges so that every offense that comes in, that the judge would know between $50 to $100 fine. Would that not be a proper message to send?
Again, that's
A political decision.
That's your decision. I've got canons of ethics that I've got to comply with, and the amounts of the fines and the penalties y'all set, whatever you set, the courts are going to follow it. It's just that I'm asking you not to add the surcharges, because personally I find them abhorrent, and it's the most difficult thing I have to deal with in traffic court every single day on every single case, with the only exceptions I know of are child and adult seat belts, and there may be one other where it's specific, and this case right now. But short of that, there's surcharges on everything.
One last question, and I certainly appreciate you and I agreeing on the surcharges, but it would seem to me that the most important thing would be to strike line 91 through 95 that gets rid of that first offense that you're posting a sworn affidavit, and just getting to the point of fining them so that they know there's a uniform fine if you disobey this law.
Well, like I said earlier, I support Representative Carson. This bill has changed human behavior, and I'm all for it with that one exception. But again, it's just my personal view. And I'm glad to do whatever this committee and the legislature decides it wants to do. Whatever you do, we're going to follow the law. We don't make up the law, and they're not supposed to, and we're not going to.
Let me say this, we were originally supposed to have this room from 1 to 3. It's now 3:25. I don't know that they're gonna evict us. I don't see anybody gathering in the hall, but, and I don't want to admonish anybody for speaking what they believe. And I know the judge is an unusual witness because he's so knowledgeable. Well, he's so knowledgeable, but I've still got one more question, and then we're gonna move on. We've got 7 more people that want to speak, so please hold your remarks as get through them as rapidly as you possibly can, as long as you get your message across. Because I don't want to set a time limit like we have in the past that limits people significantly. And this is an important issue, but we need to get through it. So, Representative Frazier. Yes, sir. Aren't you on here?
No.
Holcomb. Okay. Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Understanding the policy goal that is being sought here, which is to achieve a decline in overall use of phones and distracted driving and everything else, my understanding is that if an individual is using their device and driving while distracted, but then causes an accident or some other harm, that more likely than not, there will be multiple charges and not just distracted driving. Can you comment quickly on that, if that is consistent with your experience in your court?
Yes, they'll be following too closely, improper lane change, too fast for conditions. There will be a moving violation that goes with it, and that's where my personal policy, absent some extraordinary circumstance like an unexpected heart attack, I'm going to send you to driving school as part of your sentence. Some people come in, they've already gone to driving school, and then under a code section, which I can give you the site, I'm authorized to reduce the fine by 20%, 40-5-57C1C. Yes, sir, there will be another charge. And as I said, when we get in a situation where somebody's financially unable to pay any fine, we can let them do community service on the other charge. And if they do all that, then I say, okay, we'll go ahead and suspend the $50 or whatever it happens to be. And sometimes the solicitor recommends adjusting the other fine a little higher than normal to compensate for that. So there's a workaround there. And I think most of y'all would agree, if you're on a cell phone and have an accident, you probably need to go to driving school.
Right. And if ultimately an individual's license is suspended, isn't it true that the punishment for that is both a fine and 2 days in jail, up to 1 year in jail?
If the first offense for driving on suspended license is 2 days and that fine, second offense is 10 days, fourth offense is a felony, or driving without a license. And we see that with a lot of people who have no license for various reasons.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Judge, I think you are paroled temporarily.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Carson. You have saved thousands of lives. Thank you, Judge.
Okay, next up, we have Mr. Todd Hayes and Barry Morgan from the Georgia Association of Solicitors General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Barry Morgan. I'm the Cobb County Solicitor General, and I'm here today to support Representative Carson in his bill and say that the Georgia Association of Solicitors General has endorsed this bill, and I think you have a letter to that effect in your packet. Now, I can read a judge, and I can know when I don't need to give a long closing argument, so I'm not going to give a long one to you right here. But we, in particular, the legal fiction that this law created 2 years ago, where if you go and buy a $17 Bluetooth device and bring it to court and show it to the judge, the words in that law says, he is shall not guilty. That is legal fiction. He was guilty. If you wanted to make us waive it, you should have just said, prosecutors, you got to waive it the first time instead of not guilty. What that created is, because on tickets A person is not, there's no record created when the ticket is issued. It's only after when the case is completed. And because they are not guilty, there is never a record. So in my county, with 6 cities and the county jurisdiction, one person driving on a Sunday afternoon through all 6 of those cities and into unincorporated Cobb County could get 7 of those tickets, and none of us in county would know that. And so the person, it's the only law that we have in the state of Georgia where we rely on the person to come forward and say, this is my first time. Typically, we have that, the judge has that in front of them and they can weigh that in their decision. So I'm going to stop there because I've read the room and I see that y'all are in agreement with that. As to the other issue as to changing behavior, I think as the judge articulated, this is a fine-only offense. I would love to have ask someone in a negotiation, will you please go and get a driving school? Will you come back and maybe do some community service because you can't pay the fine addressing the issue that you have, Chairman Powell? But we don't have that in this law because it is a fine only. If you wanted to, and again, this is your policy decision, not mine, but if you allowed a judge to have that discretion to give those types of alternative sentences instead of a fine, I think you could also change behavior that way. And I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Good afternoon, Todd Hayes. I'm Cherokee County Solicitor General, also here on behalf of the Georgia Association of Solicitors General. And I bring 2 points to you. One is a time-saving issue as it relates to that first offense waiver, and just a little bit of practical thought about how that works. Mr. Morgan is exactly right. When you start crossing county lines, you lose the ability to see what's going on in other places. In my jurisdiction and in some others, we've attempted to close that loophole by creating an affidavit that the people can sign, and we actually upload that onto the Prosecuting Attorney's Council tracker system so that those who use tracker, which is most of the jurisdictions, can see that. And that narrows it out a bit, but it doesn't do the job completely because there are many jurisdictions like Mr. Morgan's that do not use that program. So you cross that line from North Marietta to Woodstock and you can't see that anymore. So I would endorse the idea of eliminating that waiver. The other part about that too, and if you'd like to see what they actually look like, I brought some copies so you can see those. One of the things that's in our waiver that might be an unintended consequence of having that first offense waiver in place is that they do swear under oath that this is their first time, and we do check them internally, and believe it or not, we found 1 or 2 that didn't tell the truth. They've just signed a waiver that subjects them to felony punishment for perjury for having sworn under oath that this was their first time. And that could be an unintended consequence for somebody who was using a cell phone improperly. So that's another good reason to get rid of it. And then coming back on the incremental increase in the fines that's been proposed by Representative Carson, we are talking about an incremental increase. If we just went to straight punishment as a misdemeanor, keep in mind that if we just threw this back in as a general misdemeanor, we would go from the fines that are currently in place to a range of 0 to 1,000, and we'd also bring in the possibility of having probated sentences. And when we get those probated sentences in play, that's when we can do alternative things like insist on a driving school, insist on community service, or insist on other conditions in order to be able to avoid the fine. As it is, I think Representative Carson designed the bill to be a fine-only offense, so you are limited in what you can do. If you want to increase punishment on a fine-only offense, there really is nothing else to do other than increase the fine, which is why I think he lands in the way that he does. So those would be my comments. I know, Mr. Morgan, I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Do we have any questions with these 2 gentlemen? If not, we certainly appreciate you coming today. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Mr. Sam Pittman.
Thank you. Last time I was here, it was regarding my daughter, McKay Pittman. She was one of the nurses at Georgia Southern. I see people all the time holding phones, and yeah, I think you got 3 kinds of people in the cars. You got the people that are law-abiding; they put their phones down. When the law was passed, it was the right thing to do. You got the other people that are embarrassed when they get caught, and they hide the phone. They see the glow coming up from their lap. Those people are embarrassed, okay? Then you got the third type of victim that is kind of what, Chair, the chairman related to where you get the universal hand gesture, or you just shake your head, and they will never ever agree to do anything as far as putting the phone down because they know more. So you got the people that follow the law, the people that are embarrassed and will put their phones down because they don't want to get caught, and then you got the people that are just outright don't care. I'm not a regulation guy. I don't like regulations, but there's a place for regulations. And the person sitting in jail right now is going to get out in July. He got 1 year for each of the girls that he killed. So Caitlin and Morgan and Emily and McKay and Abby got 1 year for losing their lives. And we know what was going on that day in that car, in that truck. We know. I would ask that we need to figure out a way to get the to help our fellow Americans and drivers understand that they will lose their privileges, even if it's only a year for taking somebody's life. He lost his family too because he's been in jail for 5 years. So it's not just the people on the end that are getting their kids or their families killed or traumatized from an accident. It's the people that are actually lose their family because they've done something that they really knew they shouldn't have been doing. And that's something that I'd like everyone to consider. And I appreciate every single person's question in here today. Every single one of them. I learn more, I hear, I understand all sides of everything everybody said, but this is something that sometimes we have to help ourselves from things that we really can't help ourselves from. And I think phones are a difficult thing to deal with in the car. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Pittman? I'd just like to say I knew Abby, and I know her father, and I knew her uncle, and her aunt teaches school in our school system, and I know what a traumatic tragedy this has been for their family, and you know, we certainly sympathize with you, and I know what was going on in the truck.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
You certainly have our condolences.
Well, and I just checked with Jennifer. I think our insurance rates are going down or have been stabilized. And I just heard on Bloomberg where across the country, insurance rates are going up around 4%. So this is we talk about taxes and talk about fines, and this is something where I think there's actually been a benefit to actually trying to get people to make some changes. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Next, we have Jennifer Smith with StopDistractions.org. She's come all the way from Chicago here today to speak with us, and she came through all the hearings that we had on the study committee, so we certainly appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also, just before I read, I'm actually just going to read a testimony from a family that could not make it today. But I just want to let you know what you did here in Georgia has saved lives across this entire country, because 5 states passed laws that mirrored yours last year, and another 10 could do it this year. So you're saving this country with what you're doing, and it's not just Georgia. So from the bottom of my heart and these families all across the country, we do thank you for that. So I'm sorry, it's in black and white. We couldn't find a color printer. But this is from Wanda Hott. She's from Chatsworth, Georgia. This was her 7-year-old grandson. He was killed in a car crash on March 1st of 2019, after this law was already in effect with that 98% awareness, due to a distracted driver. He and his mom were on their way to school. They were stopped waiting for a car to turn when a 16-year-old boy hit them in the rear with his Jeep going clear on top of her daughter's car and causing head injuries to her grandson. Preliminary hearings showed no speeding, but distracted driving by a mobile device. Since preliminary hearing, nothing has been done. We would like to see revoking of licenses for 5 years, costly fines, high insurance rates, and for these people to register as distracted drivers. We are so heartbroken and miss our baby so much. I go sit with him almost every day at his gravesite, and my heart breaks. Please help us put a stop to distracted driving. Thank you. And I just have to second that there are more deterrents needed. I understand the low income and all of that, but we're not asking for a drastic raise in fines. I mean, this is $100, which could be lower if you speak with the judge and let them know. I mean, it's also just don't do it, and you could save that fine, as well as many other states. I could name 6 states right now that actually on the 3rd offense, it is possible license suspension. So these aren't as much as they could be.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Smith? Thank you very much for coming such a great distance. Next, we have Ms. Jill Travis from the Georgia Association of Criminal Trial Lawyers.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. I had my eyes dilated this morning, so that's why I'm wearing some sunglasses. I can't, otherwise it's all a blur up there. My apologies if it looks like I'm hiding behind these glasses. I'm the executive director of the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I'm here to wholeheartedly agree with Judge Jackson with respect to the elimination of the add-on fees, the statutory surcharges, also mentioned by Chairman Powell. We're very concerned about the proliferation of the money that's involved in this. We understand that fines are an important feature of criminal penalties, but unfortunately, there's not a client that any of my members have represented that said, if I'd have known the fine was going to be that much, I wouldn't have committed the crime. It just doesn't act as a deterrent. The education feature that's been mentioned is something that is, it appeals to every sense of the story. When we think long ago of people not wearing safety belts, many of us, some of the ones that are more my contemporaries, remember when wearing safety belts seemed like such a foreign thing to do. And then we became educated on it, and now there's probably hardly a time that you get in a car that you don't think of it as second nature. So we would ask that the legislature consider aspects of promoting more education. I know Representative Carson wholeheartedly believes in that, the need for education in this spirit. Another concern that we have regarding the bill, and I haven't seen the latest substitute, but it does appear that the language regarding the intention of dedicating funding still remains. There are constitutional issues related to that, and I realize you're walking the edge, but it seems like if you're going to go down that road, go down the road and make it clear, but don't just walk the edge. Those were our concerns. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions for Ms. Travis? Representative Holcomb.
What do you think the likely proportion of the clients of the lawyers that you represent would even have an understanding of the fees at all?
Very, very few. I mean, the last speaker, and we're extremely sympathetic to anybody that's been involved in a loss like this. But when the statement is made, the judge can lower the fine a little bit. Well, the language in the last substitute I said shows a mandatory minimum. So there is no discretion of a judge to lower the fines. I just don't know anybody that is involved in the criminal justice system, sadly, that has thought about, I'm not going to do this because it's going to cost too much money, or I might go to jail. But I think, though, the education aspects of it can raise people's consciousness of it. I'm not familiar with what kinds of programs are offered in the driving schools in connection to these distracted driving. I mean, we all know when we're driving in a car, and whether it's a conversation you're having with somebody or you're reaching for some food that, you're hungry and you look away, you know that there are circumstances where you're not paying attention as much as you could. Obviously, the phone is a much higher distraction and can be for a greater period of time, but there's not a correlation that I'm aware of.
Thanks.
Representative Frazier, was that you? Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very interested in learning more from my colleagues or perhaps from the presenter about this public education campaign, because I I would like to know, is that something that we would mandate in this law, or that we can have other conversations about allocating funding for that, and what department that would come from? Because I do think that the need is very great to raise even further awareness. I feel like it's the impact of what's happening is not truly understood. I went to that AAA, the state conference on public safety, and they talked about it's a 50% chance that that you'll kill, if a person is killed, it's a 50% chance it'll be by distracted driving, that it will not be yourself, it'll be another person. I remember that statistic just really stayed with me. But anyhow, what about, if we want to can this body make a recommendation for a strong public safety campaign? Or, Mr. Chairman, I just would like to know.
I'm certain we can make a recommendation. A recommendation certainly doesn't have the force of law.
So who would make that law? I mean, we don't create a law to tell, like, what department would that be out of if we wanted to have a campaign about that?
I guess it would come out of the Governor's Office of Highway Safety. And certainly the Department of Public Safety would be involved.
Okay, so that's something I'd be interested in having further conversation about.
And they do that to some extent already, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I've just been involved with them with another bill, and they advocate on traffic safety on a regular basis, both of them.
Uh-huh.
So. And they do a lot of airtime, if you've noticed. They're a conduit for federal funds that come for traffic safety in this state, and they do a lot of advertisement on TV with regard to traffic safety issues. The Governor's Office of Highway Safety.
Thank you.
Sure. Chairman Petrie, is that you?
Me again, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. Madam, so you're opposed to the court fees and the fines, and having listened to this testimony, I have been, or to the increase, not opposed to the fines. I'm sorry.
To the elimination of the surcharges not being added on.
Right. And so, first thing I'll say is, so the more I listen to this conversation, it's good that that's what we're here for. We're having these kind of conversations and debates. It's good. The more I listen to it, the less concerned I am about the fines. And because, the bottom line is, driving is not a right, it's a privilege. And, you don't have a constitutional right to drive. We give you the privilege to drive. And you have to have a license. You have to buy insurance. We require people to buy insurance, right? Okay?
Yes,
you have
sir.
to pay for that.
Yes, sir.
You have to buy a car. You have to pay to put gas in it. And so it seems to me that, if you're going to jeopardize the lives of others, there needs to be a penalty for that. And we're trying to, so I understand well what we're trying to do here. I have a question for you. So are there other things that we could do that might be helpful? Tell me about community service. Now, it appears that right now we do not have the ability, and I'm going to look at the judge over there. It appears to me that we don't have the ability today, correct, to sentence someone, if they can't pay a fine, to community service. Is that correct?
Under 42-8-102D, if probation is imposed, a judge can convert a fine or statutory surcharges or restitution to community service. But because this is a fine-only offense, the conversion to community service is not available to the court.
So that is not there. So to answer my question, so there is no way to do that now. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Judge, you agree? Okay, so we can't do that. So tell me, how do you feel about that? Because it seems to me that if you sentence somebody to community service to pick up trash down the side of the road with the car speeding by, you might be a little more sensitive to the issue of hands-free driving. So tell me why we aren't doing that, and to the author, to Representative Carson, have you considered that, broadening the ability because we've focused here on fees, but could we broaden the actions that might be made available to punish someone, to get them to change behavior? We're all trying to do the same thing. All we want to do is change behavior.
I understand. To answer your question, Representative Petrie, is, have I thought about an education campaign, correct?
No, sir. My question is more about making community service sentences available to individuals who might not be able to pay the fee. People are concerned about their ability to pay the fee, the hardship of the fee. Have you considered that?
I have not, but I'm open to suggestions. I don't know how many states that have seen the success in reduction of traffic fatalities. I don't know how many of those states truly put forward stringent community service or what have you. It's been more on the fines and the points, more so the fines.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Travis, no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Bob Dallas, former Director of the Governor's Office of Highway Safety.
Thank you, Colonel and Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to be here, and yes, I served as the Director of the Governor's Office of Highway Safety from 2003 to 2011. 2010 is when we first passed the two bills that elevated distracted driving to include our devices that we now find so common. And the two bills, one applied to everybody, and but still allowed for talking on the phone, holding it. And the other one applied to people under 18. That was a total ban. And so that went forward, and we had 8 years of experience, so Representative Carson came here and presented to all of you and the entire legislature and the governor that we had to do a better job because the data showed that we were not achieving results. And that was the issue. The law is in place to achieve a result. It's a behavioral change. It's not to raise money. It's not to hurt people. It's to prevent people from hurting other people. And so the question then becomes, what works? And I turn back to my experience, and I just have to commend this legislature. For many years, since 1990, I've been working on issues dealing with highway safety. In fact, Chairman Powell and I go back to 1990, if you might recall that. And with that, this legislature and this state has done a whole lot more than pretty much any other state of the country to advance safety on the roadway. With that, we've learned what works. And I can tell you the following. What works is that we have strong enforcement with clear laws, but that's not enough. And what I mean by strong enforcement with clear laws, that you have a law enforcement community out there that's enforcing our traffic safety laws. You have consequences associated with that, such as clear fines or consequences, whatever that might be. That did not work alone. And we found that with impaired driving and occupant protection, safety belts. The second part that we added to that, and we found that the needle moved, was a very strong education campaign. And that education campaign focused on not telling you what you should be doing so much, because let's face it, I could survey this entire audience, everybody behind that camera, virtually 100% of the people know that we should not be using the devices while we drive. What changes the behavior is that the public is informed that if you violate this law, you will get a ticket. If you violate this law, you're going to go to jail, for example, with impaired driving. So you saw click it or ticket. You drink, you drive, you lose. That moved the needle. So if you ask me what will work in this instance, first is doing exactly what Representative Carson is doing in this bill. Clarifying that there is no get out of jail free card, raising the fines to make them clear that this is how much it is, but I submit to you that we do need an educational component. I think that's why that's in here with Representative Carson's bill. Now, having been in this position for 8 years, I realize that money does not grow on trees, and it does, unless you call the federal money that. But I know that this bill does not include one thing that I would submit to you is important, whether it's time now or later. The Highway Safety Office is eligible for a grant from NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to the tune of about $1.3 million if it had a compliant law dealing with teen driving. So if we brought back the prohibition for teens, in other words, people under 18, not being able to use the device under any circumstance, that would free up that amount of money, which then could be used for several years for a very strong educational campaign. And I believe then firmly, just as I have seen with impaired driving, just as I have seen with occupant protection, that would move the needle. Because let's face it, Representative Carson came forward 2 years ago because we didn't do the job. He's back again today because we have to do a better job. The last piece that's missing is how do we pay for a really strong education campaign that lets that public know you get caught, you're going to have a consequence, namely paying a fine, and the consequences, out of your pocket. And that has worked. And let's face it, impaired driving, we know, we'll talk about $10,000 that'll cost to pay fine defense attorneys to get us through the process. But you know what? How much does a safety belt violation cost? Very little. But the consequence is clear. The public knows that if they're not wearing their safety belt, they can get pulled over and have to go to court and deal with that fine. So the certainty of that is really done a good job of increasing our occupants, drivers, and throughout the vehicle in wearing a safety belt. We're in the mid-90s, I think, at the last survey that we did. So we do a great job with that because we had the right laws and we had the right messaging. I'll close with one point. The question was raised as to how do we know what the number of first-time violations are? Well, it depends on if they have an affidavit today or not. But second and third-time violations, my understanding is the Department of Driver Services does keep data. In other words, it has to append to your record, your license, of what those violations are. And they can probably pull an extract to give you exact numbers to show you how many second-time or third-time violations. They have to do that. It's not just something they naturally keep. But I think that's probably available to you if you should choose. So with that, I just want to commend all of you, and certainly Representative Carson, for doing an incredible job to make us a safe state.
Any questions for Mr. Dallas? Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually think that the original version is clear with respect to the fines. It sets precise amounts, whereas the proposal adds a range, which will make it unclear and subject to discretion of the judge. But the second thing is, with respect to the data in terms of what works, and I agree with most of what you said, but this law hasn't even been in effect for 2 years. So there's been no empirical analysis, there's been no regression analyses run, there's nothing to know whether or not it's actually working, or if raising the fees by some percentage or not will in any way change the outcomes of what we're having. It's really just guesswork and speculation, right?
May I respond?
Yeah.
I would take issue with that for a couple of reasons. We've had this law, a version of its predecessor, since 2010, and that's when Governor Perdue signed the two laws I referenced earlier. 2 years ago, it was revised to make a complete ban from using the hands-free component. But when it comes to using your device, not just talking, but for other purposes, I submit to everybody here who drives, when you're stopped or perhaps when you're driving, you do see people texting, not just talking on their phone. So have we done better? I think the data that Representative Carson provided to us says, yeah, we've improved a little bit. But let me tell you one place where we have not improved. And that has to do with pedestrian crash tests. I can look at occupant protection. I can look at impaired driving. I can look at excessive speed. I can look at motorcyclists. I can look at bicyclists, but pedestrians, we've gone up. And I submit to you in great part the reason we've gone up, and trust me, it's on both sides, the pedestrian and the driver, is in part because people are driving distracted. Easy math. If I'm using my device, my reaction time versus when I hit something and how fast I'm going when I hit that thing will differ if I'm distracted or not. Data. Other states do have distracted driving laws that we have followed, and now I think Georgia is a leader and going to be a better leader. But what we've seen with the other states, and I would provide New York as an example, and I think some of the folks here probably have more current data than I do, that the higher fine has had a bit of an impact. So I'm not here to argue whether the range versus a certain amount. I do submit to you that having a higher fine as proposed, certainly within work zones and school zones, does send a clear message. The clearer the message, the easier it is for the Director of Highway Safety and his team to tell the public of that message. Here's what it is. You can't do that, and if you do, you're going to get caught. That's the messages that have worked for something that you pay a lot for, right? Impaired driving, if you get caught, you're paying a lot. To something you don't pay a whole lot for, which is occupant protection, not wearing a safety belt, but people comply. Why is that? Because we've seen that the messaging along with the good law can produce a good outcome. Is it perfect? Ladies and gentlemen, it has never been perfect, unfortunately. I look forward to the day when we do have 0 fatalities or serious injuries, but we are doing better than we used to, a lot better. And I, tip my hat off to Director Poole and his team and the things that they're doing day in and day out, working with everybody. This is one of those areas that I think we can do a little bit better and get a lot better result. But I'm going to say this, it will take messaging to get there, and that's why I present to you an opportunity for monies that could come from the federal government if we had a compliant law dealing with teen drivers.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. Appreciate the work that you've done over the years in this area. You've been around long enough to recall the changes that took place over the years as it relates to driving under the influence.
Yes, I have.
Mothers Against Drunk Drivers,
Yes.
all of the things that have brought us to the point that we're at now, at least in terms of how that works. I was in law enforcement for 30 years. I remember when DUI was not really looked at in such a very negative light. It was something that happened, you paid the fine. But over time, we saw incremental increases in our laws as it related to fines. We saw increases in efforts to educate the general public about this. So what we saw there in that process over a period of time was a change in attitudes, a change really in the culture surrounding what we're doing with DUI. And when we started this process 2 years ago, I think we were very clear, those of us that worked on it, that changes to this law would be forthcoming as we moved along, because it's really the same as it was with the DUI. It's about changing the culture that surrounds the use of these devices by all of us when we're behind the wheel of an automobile, realizing that we can't use those devices while we're driving. They need to be put down. So we're talking about changing culture. So I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts or any comments that you'd like to share in regard to those parallels between what we need to do about changing the culture.
It'd be hard pressed for me to add to what your experience for those many years in the Colonel have been, seen firsthand the consequences of behavior that's not appropriate on our roadway. We've seen what works. You've identified things incrementally over the years. Again, that's a testament to this legislature. You listen. You do things based on data, best practices, and you move the ball forward because you do things that work. And we've benefited as citizens on our roadway from that. So I just want to say thank you to you, and your comments are absolutely spot on. But once again, the law enforcement community, the reason you do this is to save lives and prevent injuries. When I hear anything else, it irks me. Whether somebody's saying it's for revenue or for some alternative motive, I know why you do it. If you didn't do this, I can tell you the consequence. We'd be so much worse on the roadway that not even any of us would want to get on it. We might take transfer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just a couple of follow-ups from the testimony that's been given. I know with the hour is late, if that's permissible.
Sure. And I'll tell you this, we've got two more people to speak, and in all honesty, I think at that point, I'm going to adjourn for the day and try and reschedule later this week, because it's obvious to me that there may be some amendments, and this can drag out way beyond what we expected it to. I knew it was going to be here for a while, but and I hate it that those people who travel long distances, and Representative Bonner sitting over there wanting to get to his bill, which I don't think is going to take very long, but we may have to reschedule that at that point too. I've got a meeting about 15 miles from here at 5 o'clock, and so certainly go ahead.
I just wanted to mention in regard to the education program, what Bob was just mentioning, that is basically some NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration funding, whereas we would receive an additional, say, 1.3, anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 million of additional federal funding to the Governor's Office of Highway Safety for education campaigns if we had a compliant law. What does that law require? It requires us changing our statute such that the minimum fine would be $25. Right now, there is no minimum fine. And second, it would be a complete prohibition on under 18. That means no GPS, no Waze, nothing whatsoever. And I've taken the temperature in the state capitol that there's not, I understand the reason for going that way, but there's not a lot of desire to go that way. Second, Representative Holcomb, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of items you had. You had mentioned that the fees were very clear in here and there was no range. Actually, there is a range that if you take a look
the range is there a fine of not less than $50. Excuse me, the current code says a fine of not more than $50. So there's a range up to 50, up to 100, up to 150. I just wanted to clarify that, sir. That's all. Okay. And the second is we do have empirical data in regard to cellular data use within cars. It's from a outfit called True Motion. Do we have specific clear data in regard to how that has reduced crashes? No, because again, very few people admit to what they're doing behind the wheel of the car when it comes to a phone. There is forensic evidence in regard to a DUI. You take a blood test. Forensic evidence in regard to blood tests, what have you. I can easily deny that I was using this phone or looking at it or what have you. Jennifer has just given me a graph in regard to distracted driving, percent of time spent while distracted. You're seeing it going in the right direction. The third item I wanted to mention is, imagine this. Regardless of all these endorsement letters and what I'm saying, imagine if I came to you with a bill that would reduce, and I think we had said before that we know that this is such dangerous behavior. I don't know if it was Chairman Clark or someone else said it's so dangerous in regard to texting and driving. It's as dangerous as DUI. Did we not say this here in the committee? Imagine if I came to this committee with a bill, with this right here, that said we're going to reduce the penalty for DUI driving to $50. Up to $50 for a first offense, and we could have a waiver for a first time. The phone calls would not stop to our office. I want us, is this perfect? No. And to Bob's point, we're still not perfect, but I think we're going in the right direction. No pun intended.
Thank you very much. Next, Ms. Deborah Nesbitt from ACCG. Appreciate everybody hanging around and speaking. I know it's been a long day.
Thank you. It has been a long day, and we'll be very quick. I've got Joel Wiggins with GMA here with me, and we certainly appreciate everything that Representative Carson has done and certainly agree with the law that was passed. However, we do have some concern about the fine money going to the Trauma Commission. Not that we don't support them, but as you know, we have over the years had many, many instances where those funds have been redirected to things without a constitutional amendment. Those funds seem to get lost in a big black hole. And you have to remember, at the end of the day, local government is paying for the law enforcement, the patrols, and for all of the court costs for processing those cases. So we just like to bring that to you and remind you of that. I think both GMA and ACCG have adopted a part of our policy platform to oppose any additional add-on fees or surcharges that can be redirected from its intended purpose.
Any questions for Ms. Nesbitt? No questions. Thank you. And the guy we've been waiting for, our last speaker today, is Mr. Michael Bell, who's the CEO of C.W. Matthews.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll do what the last speaker needs to do and be very brief.
Well, thank you.
I'm Executive Vice President C.W. Matthews and the President of the Georgia Highway Contractors Association. Combined with the organizations, represent about 15 to 20,000 employees that are out working along the roadways. And I'm here for one message, and that's, support Representative Carson, especially in terms of doubling the fines in work zones. We've had a number of employees injured and killed. Now, like he was talking about this a minute ago, some of them would never admit they were on a phone was the reason they got confused and entered our work zone, but it happens. And anybody that doesn't believe it's welcome. I invite you to come stand beside a road that we're paving with an orange barrel being the only thing in between you and the traveling public, and you can watch them drive by all the time. So
he's not kidding. You can take him up on that offer.
Exactly. So, but that's all I've got.
And I understand that. I served on the State Indemnification Commission for 12 years, and I was astounded. They pay benefits for law enforcement officers, firemen, EMTs, and highway workers who get killed in the line of duty or permanently disabled. And I was shocked that the ratio was about 3 to 1 for public service employees to the highway workers. And people don't realize, and they become inattentive not just with this, but with many things riding down the road. And it doesn't take much to swerve a foot or two and kill somebody. So, and when you're a pedestrian, you seldom survive one where there's 30, 40, 50 miles an hour speed. It's you're just it's traumatic.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Mr. Matthews? Okay, the last thing I'm going to say before I leave is something Chairman Lumpson talked about. And, you know, I was in the highway safety business for a long time. And, in fact, I started in 1969. We had, in 1970 census, there were 4.5 million people in Georgia. Our interstate system wasn't nearly complete. We used to have traffic fatalities over 2,000 just about every year. Today, we have 11 million people in this state. A very viable interstate system with many more people on it, and we have about 12 to 1,400. So there are many things that work, a lot of engineering, a lot of other issues that have reduced the fatality rate significantly. And I just applaud Chairman Carson for trying to work on, he has done great work, and I think the decrease the last 2 years has showed that even though everybody's non-compliant, that it's been very successful. And most people don't realize in Georgia we kill 3 to 4 more people in traffic accidents than we do through violent crimes. And I assure you, if we had that many people killed through violent crimes, we'd have a policeman on every corner of every block in this state. And I don't know what the difference is about somebody being murdered and it being so much more traumatic in the community than somebody being killed in a car wreck. Because you're still dead, you're going to be buried, your family's going to grieve, and insurance and funeral expenses and everything else come into play. So I applaud everybody for working for traffic safety, and I'm very very happy that we've been as successful as we have. I'm going to adjourn today. I hate it because I thought we were going to be able to get through. But it's very obvious to me that we've still got a lot more discussion going on here, and we're probably going to have some amendments. And I would just ask the members of the committee if they do have an amendment, if they would work with Chairman Carson, if they're so inclined, to see if we can everybody meld together to have a more efficient meeting next time out. But we're going to adjourn for today. Thanks for everybody staying.
Thank you, everyone.